if more people are armed, that means that there's going to be incidents of gun violence where people are attacking other people because they're assuming that they're armed. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
That's just bag of hammers stupid. So...
Pistols, prayer, and potluck. This is Armed Lutheran Radio.
Hey folks, welcome to another episode of Armed Lutheran Radio, a show about guns, hunting, competitive shooting, the natural right of self-defense, and what God's Word says about the issues surrounding gun rights and gun ownership. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, and this is episode number 316. Thank you so much for making Armed Lutheran Radio a part of your week again this week. Really enjoy doing this each week and hope you enjoy listening to it. And for those of you who are new to the show, thank you for joining us. And I hope you will stick around and come back next week, maybe peruse the entire catalog, 315 previous episodes for your enjoyment as well. Last week, Pastor Bennett and I sat down to discuss the aftermath of the school shooting in Uvalde, Texas. And what we knew at that point, the changes being proposed, and what we can actually do to reduce the risk of another school shooting in the future. That discussion ran well over 90 minutes. So rather than release one massive single episode or edit out lots of great content, I decided to divide the show into two very special, very specific episodes. So if you haven't listened, I would encourage you to go back and listen to episode 315 as well. You don't necessarily have to listen to that one first, because I've broken this show up into two logical, kind of self-sufficient parts. Last week we covered our discussions on the proposals by the president, the Democrats, and the media, things like gun bans and background checks and raising the minimum age to buy a rifle, and why all those ideas don't work. And this week, I have saved our thoughts on the societal reasons behind the shootings, the why as opposed to the what, focusing more on the why these things happen, and less on the tools themselves. But also, we discuss things that we can actually do that would make a difference in the future, ideas that Democrats and the left stubbornly refuse to consider. So before we do that, I do want to thank the fine folks who make this show possible, the members of the Reformation Gun Club. Today I want to give a special shout out to JJ from Toms River, New Jersey, William from Duncanville, Texas, Stuart from Spanaway, Washington, George from Hammond, Louisiana, Turbo 1889, Brian from Riverton, Wyoming, Ron from Lexington Park, Maryland, Matthew from Nixa, Missouri, and Luke from Seymour, Indiana. Thank you all so much for your support. We are listener-funded, folks. That means that we have no advertising. We have no sponsors. We rely on the support, the financial support, monthly and yearly contributions provided by these good people and many more. This little plug is as much of an advertisement as you're going to hear, as I thank the members who make everything that we do possible. If you would like to support the show, if you would like to get access to hundreds of hours of exclusive content, if you would like to find out about all the benefits of membership and get the satisfaction of knowing that you helped make this possible, plus get invitations to our monthly online hangouts, go check it all out. Memberships start at $15.17 per year. That's a little 1517, a little Lutheran inside joke. But go check it out at armedlutheran.us/gun club and come join us. We would love to have you. All right, so let's recap where we are, where we left off last week. So we have this troubled kid from a broken home, a high school dropout, working at a fast food restaurant, posing threats of violence online and pictures of dead cats and things like this. So lots of red flags. He has an argument with his grandmother. He shoots her, and then he goes to a completely unprotected school and kills a bunch of defenseless kids and a couple of teachers. Now, the response to this on the part of the media and entertainment and the left in general, politicians, the White House, is gun control, of course. That's the always the playbook, that they always keep coming back to this one thing. And I mentioned this comic that last week that I had seen that really sums this up nicely. And it basically just says, look, there's this thing that I've always wanted to do, and we need to do it. And if you don't want to do it, you're a bad person. That's basically where we are in the gun control debate, in the gun violence debate. Whenever some tragedy like this happens, the same old things that they've always wanted, gun control, come back, are brought back out, and they're not willing to discuss anything else. In fact, the president's spokesman told, I think it was Peter Doocy who asked a question, Peter Doocy from Fox News last week, that about the question of hardening or protecting our schools, and she said flat out, the president has no interest in discussing protection, increasing security for our schools. So they want gun control, and that's it. We need more gun control, like the laws that already did nothing to stop the killer, this killer, or any of the others. Imagine, for example, if we responded to 9/11 by calling for a ban on airplanes or tall buildings, rather than hardening our airports and making our airplanes more secure and examining the root cause of those attacks, which was radical Islam. Imagine if after Oklahoma City, the bombing there, for those of you who are too young to remember what that was, the bombing of the federal building in Oklahoma City in the 90s. Imagine if our response to that had been to ban fertilizer, which was used to make the bomb, rather than securing federal buildings or discussing why, what the motivations were for the attack. So that's the same approach, though, that's the kind of approach that we're taking to school shootings. Whenever we're faced with the prospect of more school shootings, one could happen at any point, because our schools are not safer as a result of past tragedies, because we spend all of our time playing political football with the idea of gun control first and forever. Our elected officials think we should restrict the rights of over 100 million American gun owners who did not go out and shoot up a school, rather than protecting the kids who are in the schools now. And that's where we are. So we discussed in last week's show, if you have not heard it, we discussed most of the major proposals and why they are nonsensical. So go back and listen to our discussion of that if you would like. I would highly encourage it. This week, we're going to sit down and we're going to talk about the why society creates the kids we have, why we never seem to catch them, and what we can do that would actually make a difference to protect our schools. So sit back and enjoy the rest of the show, and I will talk to you next week.
Hello, this is Pastor Brian Wolfmueller of Table Talk Radio. Hey, pay attention, because you're listening to Armed Lutheran Radio.
Jim Jordan, the senator, I guess he is, from Ohio, was pointed this out this week. I saw in an interview or a response to some of these proposals. Well, none of these things that are being proposed, none of them are actually addressing the why.
Yeah.
Right? They're addressing the how, and it's only a specific kind of how, right? It's just this one tool, when there are other ways to kill, and there are other ways for people to get their hands on firearms. These things are not addressing the question of, well, why is this happening? Why do people think that this is a solution to whatever their problems are?
Yeah. Why isn't there compassionate mediation with those who clearly are disturbed? Why is it that we wait until something like this happens that we're suddenly talking about mental health issues. Because the signs were there all along. How many of these incidents where there have been mass murders could have been prevented if someone had stepped in and said, this is a person who clearly needs help?
Well, yeah, and that's one of the pull quotes from Biden's speech that I didn't watch. And I have to agree with this one point was we need to focus on mental health in schools and having empowering funding, doing whatever we can do to make sure that schools have adequate social services. They have counselors who can identify and help kind of steer some of these troubled kids in the right direction, or if not, report them, raise a red flag and report them to authorities. That's one area that we should focus on instead of trying to take guns from 300 million or 100 million law-abiding citizens who didn't go out and kill somebody the other day.
Yeah. There is no law that is going to prevent these kinds of things from happening. You cannot legislate away evil. You cannot change people's hearts by passing laws. What you can do is be vigilant and protect yourself from these sorts of depraved murderers who intend to do as much harm as they can to human lives. And yet that's not our focus.
Well, and the common response to what you just said is, well, so you just don't want, so why do we have laws at all? And that's not what we're saying. We're not suggesting that we shouldn't have any laws. What we're suggesting is that simply passing a law is not going to make a change in this trend. What we have to do is to figure out why society got to this point at which so many of our young people seem to think doing something audaciously violent is going to make their lives better, or their lives are in such a horrible place that ending it in suicide by cop, going out in a blaze of glory is the way to go.
And there is a reason that these kinds of things are happening, but the reasons no one wants to talk about, at least not people in the media or those on the political left. They took God out of the classroom. They took prayer out of schools. They no longer taught firearm safety in schools as was common practice 60 years ago. They have devalued human life to the point where you have politicians who are advocating for violently dismembering an unborn child hours before birth, a full-term baby.
And then the next day arguing we need to protect kids by banning your guns.
Yes. And so when you have a society that hates God and devalues life, you shouldn't be surprised when these kinds of things happen. We need a society that honors things like fatherhood, that upholds the sanctity of life, that says that, hey, we need strong men in homes to raise these men to be, or these boys to be men and to be upstanding members of society. But instead, we have these emotionally disturbed boys who have been taught that their only resolution to the troubles in their lives is to engage in violence.
Yeah, we used to have a society that created, through its institutions and its traditions, sort of helped mold people into adulthood and set boundaries for your life, for your behavior, set expectations, and it helped mold you as a young person and in your growth into adulthood and in your pursuit of a fulfilling life. Now we have a society that tells you fulfillment is whatever you want it to be, and all these traditions are restrictive, and so it's up to you to create your fulfillment. And your fulfillment isn't in God, it's not in community, it's not in family, it's in your perceived, whatever your truth is, whatever your self-identity is. All those things are now, we're leaving it to individuals to define themselves instead of society helping to mold and shape us. And we've stepped back and we've created an entire generation of kids who, unless they've got good parents and very close ties to their churches and synagogues, their religious communities, they are adrift because the culture is teaching them all the wrong things.
If I was to sum it up as succinctly as possible, what we are witnessing in the modern era is the triumph of the ideas of Friedrich Nietzsche and nihilism, that God is dead and nothing matters.
Yep. Now, we'll finish up with the one thing that nobody on the left or in the media is interested in talking about, and that's actually protecting schools. And in fact, yes. I don't know whether you heard this, but President Houseplant's new spokesperson, whatever her name is, said that the president has no interest in discussing legislation to harden schools. None.
It is very hard to hear things like that and not come away with such a jaded perspective that leads me to think that the only reason that they are not doing everything that they can to harden the security at our schools is because they know when these things kind of happen, it gives them a political advantage of some sort. I hate to say it because I don't know any other way around it.
I know, and every time this happens and they do this, we start wandering into Eighth Commandment area trying to understand their motivations, but it's the only one that makes sense.
It is. It is, because every single time one of these things happens, they try and use this to their advantage politically, and yet they will never consider the actual solutions to prevent these kinds of things from happening. There was an article that popped up on my Facebook page from about a school that spent $400,000 putting in a state-of-the-art security system with all sorts of cameras and monitors and remote access switches and all of that stuff.
That was here in North Texas.
That was? Okay. It made it virtually impossible for someone who came into the school with intent to do evil to have any success whatsoever. But if, for example, the use of what they call man traps, where you have a secured area that requires a entry access, and then you're placed in an intermediate area, and then you have someone else has to grant access to the rest of the facility. If someone enters into an area like that, they're trapped. You have bulletproof glass. They can't go anywhere. The money that was sent to Ukraine could have paid for this kind of security in every school in the country.
Mm-hmm.
What other conclusion can you come to than they don't give a damn about the safety of our kids when they have made it perfectly clear that they have no interest in doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's all too clear that, especially when they come out and say it, point blank to Peter Doocy the other day, that the president has no interest in talking about protecting schools. There's no other conclusion to come to.
No.
It's because this is a political football they know they can profit from. And there's no advantage to be gained in talking about hardening schools when your political base wants gun confiscation. And you're a president who is on a 34% approval rating and can't speak coherently, and people are losing on a daily basis, losing confidence in, and you've got a shellacking coming in November, talking about hardening schools when the knee jerk for 40 years has been gun control and those rascally Republicans and their opposition to gun safety legislation. This is a political football. Our kids are political pawns. Yeah. And so they choose gun control instead of talking about real solutions. I mean, we're not even talking about the hard part. The hard part is what you and I were talking about earlier, is trying to figure out the why and addressing that. That is a generational thing that's going to take forever to fix, and politicians won't tackle that because there's no political advantage in it, because that's right. Many years past their terms of office, right? They're only interested in what's going to get them elected in 2 years and 6 years and 4 years. They don't care about generational change. So they go to gun control every time, and instead of, while we're trying to figure out the why, I don't understand why we can't make these targets, these schools, harder targets in a way like that North Texas school district did, like the Israelis have done. Maybe not to that extreme, but have the Department of Homeland Security evaluate every public school and make recommendations to harden them. I know that's going to take time to get done, and once that those recommendations are made, it's going to take time to implement. But in the meantime, we could allow schools to arm themselves. And here in Texas, we've got 30%. Only 30% of the schools in Texas have armed staff. Thank God my school system is one of them. And big signs out front.
Yeah. In Minnesota, the law is that if the superintendent gives you permission to carry on school property, you can legally do so. And so, for example, the school where my children attend, the pastor is considered the superintendent.
Right.
And so he is willing to grant that permission to anyone who goes through the legal process to get their permit to carry. Think of the ramifications of saying, you know what, we care so much about the safety of our kids that the government is going to pay for active shooter training. We're going to pay for the firearm. We're going to pay for everything for any teacher who feels comfortable enough taking the necessary steps to be trained and armed in order to defend their students. And then
that would cost a pittance, and it would be a huge, huge benefit.
It would certainly cost a heck of a lot less than $400,000 per school.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that you can do within a matter of weeks. Projects like that of doing a $400,000 security system, that is 12 to 18 months minimum. Compared to, hey, within a month's time, we can get you trained, we can get you proficient, and we can get you, all the equipment you need to be armed and to be concealed in an appropriate manner so that nobody knows you're armed while you're on school property. And then we're going to put up the big fat signs that say, our staff is armed. You will be shot if you try anything stupid.
What was it the sheriff in Florida said? We want schools to shoot them so much that you can read the local newspaper through them.
Yes.
And this works. And all this talk about kids being scared to go to school. We talked to my daughter. She's not in elementary school anymore, but she's in middle school, and she came up through our elementary school system, and we have those big signs, and we talked about this event, and do you feel afraid? Do you feel uncomfortable? She's like, no, I'm not scared, because I know that our staff has guns. I don't know who has them, but I know they do. That's the way it works at our schools. Right. Certain members of the staff are armed. You just don't know who they are. The students don't know who they are.
And that's the way it should work at every single school. Anyone who comes into that school intending to do harm, they need to know, oh, hey, that janitor might be armed. That lunch lady might be armed. Maybe I'm not going to do anything.
And if the schools, and we're not talking about forcing teachers to carry. This is something that we mentioned last week.
Right.
I think that...
And there are some teachers that simply shouldn't carry because they do not have the mental
This is very true. The teachers that post their stuff on TikTok, that's a perfect example.
I don't want the teacher who's leading her students in pledging to the pride flag also carrying a firearm, because she just might shoot the guy in the classroom next door because she doesn't like the way he votes.
But I think that's one of the, and I mentioned this last week, I think this is one of the places where terminology gets us a little bit in trouble, because we've talked about, well, we need to arm teachers. Wait a minute. That makes it sound like we're going to put a gun in the hands of every teacher. We need to be more specific with the way we describe this and talk about allowing schools to arm their staff. not forcing, because the other way makes it sound like, oh yeah, every teacher's going to have a gun. Oh my God. And then people freak out. And then the conversation goes completely off the rails. Well, the answer is simple. If members of the staff are willing to take on that responsibility and to go through the training, then they should be allowed to do so. And if nobody in the school wants to take it on, then we should fund the Department of Education, for all the money it wastes on crap, should be providing the funding to hire armed security for every school in the country.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And my idea of paying for the training and even the firearms for these teachers that are comfortable doing so is that there shouldn't be any financial burden that would prevent them from doing this. You know, you have some teachers in some school districts that don't get paid a whole lot. And I would hate there to be a teacher who says, I would really like to do this, but I just can't afford the training and I can't afford the firearm. Let's take that out of the equation and make it possible for them.
They come to school, they collect a firearm from a locked safe in the administration building or the administrative offices. When they leave at the end of the day, they lock it up when they leave. Right? If it's not their own personal firearm. And there are great programs out there like Faster Save Lives that have fully developed training programs that they're using in places, I think, like Ohio and Colorado, that I don't think are terribly expensive. So it's not like, and even if they are, it's worth it to do that as opposed to doing nothing, because we see what nothing has gotten us.
Right. And what's the mantra the left has been saying for years? If it just saves one life.
Yes, setting aside the absurdity of that argument, we can make that same argument on our part. Our ideas would save lives too, so why don't we do it?
Yes.
And then there's the one last thing that I think there's room for discussion on is, what about the Gun-Free School Zones Act? If they won't repeal it, and if they won't talk about repealing it, how about we amend it so that licensed concealed carry holders can carry on school grounds? There's a compromise. Right? They always talk about we can't seem to find compromise on the gun issue. Well, there's one. No, we'll keep the Gun-Free School Zones Act in place, but you're going to allow concealed carry permit holders to carry on school grounds for the protection of students.
Maybe just remind them that the Gun-Free Schools Act was passed by a Republican, and maybe they'd be more willing to reform it. Yes, thank you, George H.W. Bush.
Yeah.
One of the most short-sighted pieces of legislation.
Yeah. The idea that you just put up a sign and everything's great. All right, let's wrap up with one last thing, and this is actually a theological thing. So you've probably seen or heard similar comments recently, and we've addressed some of this kind of thing, some of these ideas before, but it bears repeating just to tie a bow around everything. The suggestion that as a good Christian, and if you would love kids and more than your guns, and as a Christian, you should be opposed to the idea of people owning guns because guns are made for killing. Or another angle on this argument is, as a Christian, even if you're pro-gun, you shouldn't be opposed to more gun control laws. Let's get your thoughts on those ideas.
Now, the simple answer to that, at least from my perspective, is I didn't purchase firearms for the purpose of killing people. I purchased them for two reasons: for sport and for defending my family. As a Christian, I have a responsibility to protect my wife and my children, to protect my congregation, to protect my fellow man. And all these laws do would be to constrain my ability to do that effectively, because it wants to take those firearms that I have purchased and either make them illegal or remove them from my hands. Most of the firearms that I have in my safe would be considered illegal in the state of California. And yet those who say these kinds of things want to uphold the kinds of laws they have in California as a model for the rest of the country. All these laws do is make criminals, or I shouldn't say all these laws do, the intention of the laws that they are proposing would only make criminals out of law-abiding citizens whose only desire is to protect the people they love.
Exactly right.
So tell me, what is so quote-unquote Christian about that?
Well said. And I think that's the perfect place to finish it off. Quick prediction on what you expect politically is going to happen. Do you think Republicans have the spine to fight what's coming down the road at them, or do you think we're going to get some sort of...
I do. My prediction is that this gets bogged down in the filibuster and it goes nowhere.
Your lips to God's ears.
Let's hope so. But bottom line, every Republican in the Senate who is up for election knows that this is a loser if they live in a red or even a purple state, that this will not fly with their voters.
Yeah. If they're a Democrat in a district that voted Trump, they're going to be, yes, I think, a little circumspect about voting for overly restrictive gun control laws.
Yes. I don't even think you get Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema on board with this, because we're talking about West Virginia and Arizona. They're not stupid. They want to get reelected.
Yep. All right. Well, I thought that would be a good place to wrap it up. That's, I think, all for today. Thank you, Pastor, for taking the time. I hate we didn't see you last week, but I'm glad we got to catch up this week.
Hey, it was a pleasure, and I always look forward to these times we get together and talk.
Folks, if you have any questions or any comments or complaints about anything you heard here on the show, please visit our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback. Leave us a voice message or a voicemail or an email. We would love to hear your comments, share them on the air, respond to them. And if you have a topic that you would like us to tackle in the future, we'd love to hear that too. Next week, we'll be back to another variety show with awesome content from the entire cast. Until then, keep shooting, keep praying. We'll talk to you next time.
John Bennett is the pastor at St. John's Lutheran Church in Willow Creek, Minnesota. For more information, visit stjohnswillowcreek.org. For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. Check out the Facebook page, The Armed Lutheran, or join our Facebook group, Fans of Armed Lutheran Radio. If you like what you hear, please leave us a comment on our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback or a review on iTunes and let us know what you think. Thank you for listening to Armed Lutheran Radio, a member of the Self-Defense Radio Network.